Hello guys, it's Eric with the Film Photography Channel. Let's take a look at the Nikon N8008S or F801S. Let's just call it Nikon's Ugly Betty, okay? It's a shamelessly plastic, albeit optioned out 1990s era film SLR, which actually replaced the gorgeous Nikon FE2. Nikon went from this to this. And that's okay, because this camera is completely loaded with features. This camera was really basic in comparison. Very capable, but also very basic, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So this camera is absolutely loaded. It has a great matrix metering, 2D matrix metering system, and also a 75% center weighted metering mode. Shutter speeds range from a full 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second. And of course you have bulb, but for some reason it didn't have a T or a timed mode. There's 1/250th flash sync. There's automatic DX coding from 25 to 5500 ASA, or you can set it manually from 6 to 6400 ISO. Okay, so let's talk about that and the metering just a little bit, because the metering, when you see an ISO range like from 6 to 6400, it kind of lets you know that this has like a really good meter. Some film cameras you might get, like typically like point and shoots or cheaper ones, they might have like a metering range from like 100 to 500, 100 to 800, something like that, which kind of tells you it's probably not the most sensitive meter. Not that it's necessarily a problem. I mean, all meters are pretty good in daylight. Some get fooled by specular highlights or different, phenomenon, but generally most meters are fine in daylight or in bright light. But when you talk about a meter that can go like -1 EV to +19 EV, like this one can do at ISO 100, that is a modern day capability. Okay, Nikon had a little fun with electronics and the features that they came up with to add to this camera. It has a multiple exposure capability of up to 9 shots within one frame, to superimpose images, or Photoshop didn't exist. I mean, there's stuff you could have done with like an enlarger or whatever when you print, but to be able to superimpose images on top of each other on the single film frame was kind of a cool trick. And and this camera could actually let you do 9 of them. So it also has a self timer that'll take 2 shots at a time, or a 2-shot self timer. It's got fully programmed automatic exposure, including aperture priority, shutter priority, program shift, with 2 different program modes, and I'll show you all that in the close-up video. This guy had automatic film advance, which would actually peel off 3.3 frames per second in the continuous high mode. Continuous low, I want to say, was right around 2 frames per second. That noisy focusing lens, it's what Nikon calls an AFD lens, and this type of lens, it was driven by a gear inside, or a screw inside the camera that would made up with the lens when it's mounted, and it would just turn to focus. So that allowed for a little more compact lens design. If you look at Nikon's newer lenses now, they're actually a little thicker because they have the autofocus motor built into the lens, where this one has the autofocus. It has no autofocus motor. The autofocus motor is built into the body of this camera, so that gives it wide compatibility with a lot of Nikon lenses. And these AFD lenses are are absolutely awesome. They're some of the best lenses Nikon's ever made. The focusing, yeah, it is a little loud. It's not terrible. It's probably sounding a little louder than what it really is on the on this microphone here. It has some compatibility with Nikon's AFS, G lenses, and of course AIS lenses, which are the beautiful manual lenses like this here. This is an example of an AIS lens. This is a Nikon 50mm f1.2. It's one of the most beautiful rendering lenses on the planet. And these AI lenses, they always had like nice, really heavily dampened focus rings. I mean, I'll say perfectly dampened, not heavily dampened. I mean, they focus just right. Where these lenses, since they were autofocus, the focusing gear had to be a lot lighter to be able to react quicker. So you see how easily these move. But for manual, I mean, these are okay for manual focusing, but I much prefer the AIS lenses if I'm gonna just be strictly manually focusing. So this camera had no cable release, but it did have this socket here that can be used for for a remote trigger. It has plus or minus 5 stops of exposure compensation, which again is pretty advanced, especially considering the era that this camera was being sold in the early 90s. Ironically, it only shows you plus or minus 3 frames. Maybe they ran out of room on the screen, but it actually does do plus or minus 5 frames of exposure comp. Nikon's MF21 control back was considered an essential accessory and adds several powerful functions. It prints the date and other info on the lower right-hand corner of the film frame, as you would expect, but it also adds a sophisticated interval timer capability, which allows the user to select start time, date, exposure, duration, etc., making it well suited for star trails and time-lapse photography. It enables exposures longer than 30 seconds, which the camera cannot do on its own. It also allows exposure bracketing from 3 to 17 frames with a differential from 0.3 to 2 full f-stops. Lastly, freeze focus is a function that won't allow the camera to take the photo until the subject is in focus. This feature even works with manual focus AIS lenses, but when used with autofocus lenses, you can achieve focus tracking by simply holding down the shutter button while you track your subject. It's a neat trick which wasn't actually promoted by Nikon as a feature, but discovered by a reviewer in a popular photography article. This is the one and only command wheel. There is no front command wheel. Of course, this is your shutter release. Here you have your mode settings, your mode button where you just hold the mode button down and then rotate the command dial to go through the different modes. And just real quick, that's your manual mode setting right there. This is your program high, which is used in conjunction with telephoto lenses. Nikon recommends that you use it in program high, which will favor faster shutter speeds if you're using like a 135 or stronger telephoto lens. Because remember, this is way before the time of VR, vibration reduction. And so anyway, beyond that is your normal program mode, where the camera kind of chooses a nice combination of aperture and shutter speed. And in program dual, will actually select between normal program and program high as determined by the lens that's mounted on there. So, it'll kind of, it's like an automatic program mode that'll select the correct type of program, if you will. And of course, this is shutter priority and aperture priority. And you'll notice there's like the little locking tab here that releases your aperture ring, as you can see there. And you're supposed to put it on F22 and lock it down, and now the camera's all set to go for like to use it in program mode or shutter priority mode or any of the automatic modes there. Earlier, this has a 3-position sliding power switch. So the first position is obviously just to turn it on. The second position is to turn it on with the beeper enabled. And the camera beeps for a lot of reasons, right? At the end of the film roll, so when you finish your roll of film, it beeps. When the film rewinding is complete, it beeps. During self-timer operation, it'll beep. Over or under exposure, it'll beep, to kind of warn you if you're way out of whack there in your exposure, or if it can't achieve a proper exposure. And possible picture blur in the program or the aperture priority modes, and that simply means that it's you're at 1/30th of a second or slower in terms of your shutter speed, so the camera will warn you that there's a possibility of a blurry photo. And like I showed you the little locking aperture ring, when that's not locked in, it'll beep. A non-DX coded film. So anyway, you get it. The camera beeps a lot, so I really recommend just kind of leaving it in the on position and just, you know, not fooling around with the beep, because it can be pretty annoying, and it can be, you know, it can disturb the folks that you're taking pictures of and make it look like you don't know what you're doing. The two red buttons here with the red markings, you hold these two buttons down together. There's no film in the camera right now, but if there were, you hold the two buttons down and it'll start rewinding the film. Unfortunately, it rewinds it all the way into the canister. It doesn't do like I prefer, where it leaves the film leader out, so to make it easier to develop the film. This is your to select your different metering types. It's got let's start the beginning. There's your matrix metering. That's a 2D matrix metering, not the 3D. Next, you've got your center weighted metering, 75% weighted towards the center. And you have the spot metering. Now, the spot metering wasn't available on the N8008. It is something that just came out with the S. That's one of the things that were added onto the S. This is your self timer, and you can set it here to take 2 frames. You can set it here all the way 30 seconds, all the way down to just a couple, down to 2 seconds, if you want to use that in place of the mirror lockup, which this camera doesn't have here. This is your exposure compensation button right here, and you can expose plus or minus 5 stops, which is actually pretty advanced for that year. And let's put it in manual, and I'll show you the shutter speed ranges. If you go, it goes all the way up to 1/8,000th of a second, which is pretty good even for a modern camera today. A lot of them don't even do that. And it goes all the way down to 30 seconds in bulb, of course. Okay, right there you see your f-stop. The E is just indicating that there's no film in the camera, or the film's been rewound. It has an exposure meter. The dial here, the exposure compensation, doubles as the exposure meter. You notice, okay, here's my compensation. Now if you take your finger off the button, it goes back to the exposure meter. Alright, so you can see right up here, when you half press and you start manipulating the command out here, you can see the meter right there letting you know if you're over or underexposed. And the meter stays on for about 8 seconds. Why is it not coming on? ME, multiple exposures. You can take up to, 9 of them, and it'll just continue to take the same, or a photo on the same frame, up to 9. The drive modes: single frame, continuous low, continuous high, and I'll let you hear what that sounds like. That's 3 frames per second. And yeah, this camera's a little loud in terms of the film advance and the shutter cocking and all that. It's a little on the loud side. So on the back, you've got your sliding, which I kind of like, auto exposure lock. It slides. Usually it's just a button you press in, and then this button is just to illuminate the top panel LCD. But on my camera, apparently it's not working, because it does not illuminate the top panel LCD at all. Alright, so on the front you see the nomenclature, the N8008S. The S is the one with the new and improved autofocusing. It's also the one that's got the spot metering versus the original. There's a button here. This is your autofocus lock button, if you can see that. And this is your depth of field preview. See the aperture blades closing down. Now this is a heavy mechanical button. It's kind of surprising, and given how electronic this camera is, this is like literally the hardest button to press on the entire body. Alright, shutter release right up top here has a great feel, and it's got a good half press for focusing or whatever it is you need to do. I've got it set on manual focusing right here. And if we look over on this side, this is your focusing switch, pretty standard on even today's Nikons. There's your manual setting, then it'll switch to single in terms of your autofocus, and then continuous autofocus. And the way continuous autofocus works, you just continuously press or half press the shutter release, and it'll pretty much focus on whatever hits that little center patch focus sensor. And then here, this this usually has a cover on it, but this socket here is just for like your remote controls. A removable rear um, rear panel, rear film cover panel. You just slide these two guys together, and mine is really tough to move. The bottom one, it's kind of stuck half the time. There we go. But yeah, once you open that up, you can see the pretty nice, nicely crafted camera on the inside. And this is a well-built camera. Don't think just because it's all plasticky, it's a cheap camera. It's a very well-built camera, really durable, and it's got a reputation for holding up really, really well. Even if you look at the plastic there, you don't see like a bunch of scratches or any of that kind of stuff on there. Anyhow, metal, not titanium shutter mechanism, and it's got to be metal because it runs all the way up to 1/8,000th, so that's pretty. Usually, well, I guess in every case you're going to see a metal if it's capable of 1/8,000th of a second. There's your sensors for your DX film. These sensors are for all the different film backs that you can use with this camera. All right, so on the bottom panel here, you see more plastic, and this is the battery chamber here. I've usually take it out with a coin. I put it in here purposely loose, just for demonstration purposes here. And this little thumb screw. This is before they kind of figured out the little bayonet turn thing. Okay, so you see it uses 4 commonly available AA batteries, which is really good. And they pretty much last forever. Early on with these automatic winding cameras, the film advance motor, it took a lot of power. I mean, some of these battery packs held like 8 batteries, and soon after this, they figured out how to do it with just like a single, CR2, whatever it's called, battery. One of those, just a small one, like looks like about half the size of a AA. Like the Nikon F6 has one of those, and it runs forever. Advances the film forever just off of one of those. Okay, one thing you may not have noticed, there's no film rewind button because, like I mentioned earlier, you just kind of hold these two buttons down together at the same time, and that's how you rewind your film. And given that there's film in there, it went ahead and rewound it, and as I mentioned earlier, it rewinds it into the canister. So that's okay. I'll figure out how to get it out. It's got a nice high eye point viewfinder, and it's got the threads for the cup, the eyepiece cup, and it also comes with attached to the neck strap a cover for the eyepiece if you're doing like long exposure photography where you don't want stray light to get into the in through the viewfinder. And this is the lens release lever. Lens mounting index mark right there, as you can see that. So I've got the an SB600 mounted on here. This is not the most compatible flash. I think these were made to really work well with an SB24, which I've had a couple of those, but I don't have one now. The Nikon flash system is just incredible. The cameras and the flashes really do work well together. But like I said, this isn't necessarily the most compatible flash, but you see the flash went into standby mode. I half press the shutter and it wakes it up, and I've got the camera set on continuous high, which should give you a whopping 3.3 frames per second. There it is, a glorious 3 frames per second, and you may not see every flash, but the flash is going off with every single shutter actuation. That's something that all the pro and semi-pro Nikons are well capable of doing. They have that continuous flash mode, which is a professional feature. You can get one of these for about $30. I think I paid like $25 for this. This lens was about the same, about $25 or $30. I didn't really talk too much about this lens, but this thing is fantastically sharp. This is the Nikon 28-70 f3.5 to 4.5 variable aperture zoom. It's got a nice wide zoom range. It actually gets out to 28, and it gives you a short telephoto for nice portraits and nice out of focus backgrounds. I was blown away by this old unheard of zoom lens. All right, guys, this is Eric with the Film Photography Channel. Thanks for stopping by. If you like my videos, please give me a like. If you want to be notified when I upload a new video, just click on that bell icon. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and go out and get the Nikon N8008S.